Hi everyone, it's William. This is the Grand Duke Dmitri Diary series. We are up to the penultimate section of this long entry of the 15th of March, 1921, finishing Dmitri's overall summary of what he encountered in Berlin among the Russian monarchists there, and then we'll be going into a day-by-day account, which will provide a lot more detail, really interesting detail. After the video that I did yesterday, where I sort of was heaping praise on the people who raised him for turning out a man with a strong set of values, I asked myself later, well, what about Rasputin? What about that whole little murder assassination thing, Okay, valid point, right? Valid point. What about all the womanizing? Yeah, valid point. But I think what it comes down to for me is the extent to which a person will return to a sort of foundational decency and be aware when they stray and have some remorse for that. That is what makes a decent human being, right? I mean, big philosophical question. But anyway, Dmitri did have that. He would sometimes even phrase it in a charming way. He would say, after a night at the baccarat table or something, today I have a moral hangover. So yeah, that's what I was getting at. I don't want to be one of these people who picks a Romanov to worship at the altar of. But anyway, we do have something of a new development in this bit of diary today. Not one that thrills me, but we will talk about that. And now for a recap. So in the previous section of diary, it was a pretty straightforward juxtaposition between what Dmitri called the yacht club types from Petrograd, and on the other hand, the right-wing types who were involved. He doesn't use the name at any point, but who were involved in this organization Aufbau in Berlin and Munich, which was sort of a merger for a short period of time of the right wing of the Russian emigration with the right wing fascist types in Germany, specifically the very early National Socialists, building up to the beer hall putsch. And in fact, there was a Baltic German emigre from the Russian Empire who walked arm in arm with Hitler and was one of those who was killed in the beer hall putsch. And Biskupski, it was either it was either Markov or Biskupski, one of the other, claimed to have hid Hitler in his own flat in Munich after the beer hall putsch. So that was Aufbau. So Dmitri is frustrated with the all talk, no action side of these yacht club bureaucratic types in Paris. And he is temporarily under the illusion that the right-wingers represent a future in which Russia would have self-government in the various parts of the country and would have civil rights for everyone, and tra-la-la, not exactly what they stood for. But anyway, our cast of characters today is we go back to our old friend Golievsky, who was a member of Dmitri's Information Bureau and who I think had more of a flirtation with the right-wingers than Dmitri ever did. But anyway, General Golievsky, who was one of Dmitri's sort of hangers-on or helpers or whatever you want to call it in Paris, And then we have the Berlin monarchists themselves, but this time talking about them overall and not as separate groups. Okay, so let's dive into this. Summarizing what I learned there, it seems to me that these really are people who want to do something. But given their life abroad and their isolation from the motherland, they are doing and can do very little for the time being. The main thing in their favor is that they are fervent monarchists and are not afraid to say it. These people took me very seriously. They invited me to join the Russian General Assembly, which is more a charitable institution than a political one, but naturally, the vast majority of its members are monarchists. Before my departure, they decided to ask me to take on the role of leading the right-wing political groups. Naturally, I couldn't refuse, but I accepted under the condition that it would be secret and that I would lead their work as a member of the Romanov family and not as a contender for the throne. But as I have already said, my visit to Berlin was too much trumpeted. The whole thing could have been handled with significantly more discretion and without fanfare. But Golevsky, who is very well characterized as a personal rather than an ideological monarchist, was awash in bliss, and instead of making every effort to cover up my visit to Berlin, he did everything possible to make it look like a royal review with him in the role of adjutant. He kept egging me on to play the role of conquering hero, and I, like a fool, could not restrain him or myself. So there you have, in simple strokes, my impressions of my visit to Berlin. Now I'll talk about my personal experiences, and we'll stop there and get to his personal experiences in the next video. And he's mainly only talking about one personal experience, or rather one person, Marie-Louise, but we'll get to that. So very, very interesting. And here are the redemptive words, my friend, at the end of all of this rather alarming report of even be willing to take on this role with the right-wing political groups. We finally, in the end, have him say, I, like a fool, could not restrain him, and then add, or myself. Simple, but not everybody would do that. Not everybody would do that. You know, he's obviously, thinking along the lines of blaming Golevsky for all of this. It's Golevsky's fault. On the other hand, he can't quite go all the way with that. He does have to add those two words at the end, or myself. I am the fool. I could not restrain him, or myself. I took up this role of being the conquering hero. All right. So very interesting, very interesting. I think, part of what fed into this is that Dmitri had a hard couple of years in London and Paris where he felt like he in particular and Russians in general were simply looked down on. All kinds of Russians, the communist Russians, but also the emigres and the monarchist emigres. They were looked down on. It's a perennial problem between Russia and Western Europe. Russia considering itself a great power on par with all the others, and the others all sort of looking at Russians as semi-civilized barbarians. And it's kind of a vicious circle. The one feeds the other. So Dmitri had some hard times in that respect. He was asked to leave France, and he was asked to leave England. He did leave France. He refused to leave England, and they ended up letting him stay. And everywhere he heard people saying that, well, we're sorry that the Bolsheviks have taken over, but at least it was the right thing to get rid of Nicholas II and to get rid of autocracy. And that was the general view of things. And, the Allies very much felt that they had been betrayed by Russia and so on and so forth. And Dmitri, at one point when he was traveling through India trying to get back to Europe and to Western Europe, he actually sort of burst into tears and walked out of a cinema. He'd gone to the cinema with Lady Marling in India, I think in Calcutta, if I remember. No, Delhi. Yeah, it was New Delhi. I think now it's just Delhi. And he had to leave and cry because it showed, I can't remember if it showed something bad about Russia or if it just showed all the victorious allies without anything about Russia. I can't remember which. But, yeah, so that explains part of this. A little bit, the fact that he would, even though he was the yacht club type, that he would just respond to being amongst, in a place where it seemed like monarchy was valued. Yeah, that was a little bit of joy for him after what he had experienced. So there's also the ego factor here, obviously. What's one of the first things he says? These people take me very seriously. Aha, well, you haven't had that before, have you, old boy? Most people did not take him seriously, going all the way back to Imperial Russia, to his childhood, and then to his young adulthood, when people like his father and like the Tsaritsa were constantly telling Nicholas, don't take him seriously. He thinks he's so smart. He thinks he knows what's going on, but don't encourage him. Don't take him seriously. And that was very burdensome for him. That was very hard for him because he was smart and he knew he was smart and he knew he had valuable insights, but they just, it almost seemed like they didn't want to take him serious, and I'm sure that the Trepov group and that group of people that they, he probably felt some, that they were patronizing him a bit and felt some condescension. So these people take me seriously, hurrah, who wouldn't want that? Okay, so, and he would continue to crave that, throughout the rest of his life, to just be taken seriously, not as Tsar to be or anything like that. That can fall by the wayside, but he needs to be taken seriously. And the irony is now that he's absolutely not. He's the playboy in the Russian imperial family when we look back on them. Okay, so he was not only invited to join this Russian General Assembly, about which I'll admit I know nothing. I haven't come across it. He says it's sort of a charitable organization, not really political, but a monarchist group. But not only did they ask him to join that group, but they asked him to be the head of their entire undertaking according to him. And he puts it in such a strange way, Before my departure, they decided to ask me to take on the role of leading the right-wing political groups. Well, what does that mean? I mean, I could see if he said they asked me to be the leader of the right-wing political groups, even just as in a nominal role. This is our Romanov, and of course he has this honorary position of being our leader. And here he makes it sound more active. He says, take on the role of leading the right-wing political groups. And it's interesting that he's using the plural. He's not saying Markov asked me on behalf of his group, or Biskupski asked me on behalf of his group, or Aufbau asked me. He's saying the right-wing political groups, plural. And naturally I couldn't refuse. Well, okay, whatever, my friend. And then at the end, what does he says it? He says it again. That he told them I would lead their work. I told them I would lead their work, but only as a member of the Romanov family and not as a contender for the throne. So again, he's making it sound like it would have been something that was active rather than nominal. I would lead them. They wanted me to, to be leading their work. Okay, I don't know. I can't really say about that. It may be a bit of an inflation on his part, thinking that they really want him for who he is and they don't care if he's the leading candidate for the throne or whatnot. Anyway, he says he couldn't refuse. You know, he obviously understands that this is not a good idea. He's trying to explain it. You know, they put me on the spot. I couldn't refuse. But there is a little bit of an ego boost in it for him, obviously. Okay, so I would like to pause for just a minute to ask, who were they? Again, you know, so did he have multiple people approach him about this? Was it Markov? Was it Biskupski? Hopefully we'll find out, because we're going to have more detail, like I said, in the day-by-day diary entries. Okay, and I have not, you know, I read those years ago. I have not, since I've started doing these videos, reread them. I'm trying not to read too far in advance, because I really enjoy having this process of discovery along with you. Okay, so he says that he absolutely did not want to come to them in the role of Tsar or conquering hero. That was bad. That was Golevsky's fault. But, oh, yeah, well, not quite. He kind of got a little enjoyment of that himself. And so, as I say, the redemptive words, I, like a fool, could not restrain him or myself. Okay, so here we have something very interesting. I planned to put it in several videos ago, but I'm glad I waited. And this is an account given by George Graf, who I now know became the head of Kirill's official Tsar in exile chancellery in 1922, so at some point in the following year. And he says something very interesting. I mean, Dmitri makes it sound as though they really wanted him as a leader, and he said okay, but he didn't, you know, he didn't want it to be a big deal. But according to Graf, Biskupski and the other Russian monarchists had more or less been auditioning him during his visit in Berlin, and they'd been up in the air over whether they wanted Dmitri or Kirill to be their chosen Romanov leader and Tsar in exile. And they'd originally preferred Dmitri. I mean, he was more popular by far. He was younger. He was a very smart guy. I can't say that Kirill was stupid, because probably he wasn't, but he was under the thumb of his wife, definitely. And Dmitri didn't have that, you know, holding him back. Yeah, it's easy to see why he would have been preferred, but in the end they chose Kirill. And why is that? Well, you could say it's simply because Kirill's wife made all these big donations to Aufbau. But, you know, according to Graf, what he heard was that, in quotes, his, meaning Dmitri's, his personality was appealing, but his political vision did not satisfy them. The Grand Duke, in fact, confirmed his conviction that the Romanovs would only take back the crown if it was conferred on them by a new constitution with a democratic government. Oh, thank God. Thank God, you know. Let's move past this playing footsie with the right-wingers, you know. I'm so glad that even if they pulled the wool a little bit over Dmitri's eyes and he thought, you know, there are things that I like about the people, at least they understood who he was. And that at some point he made it clear to them, and they understood that he was not going to change his convictions, and the only way he was going to keep on in this role with them was if they changed their convictions. He was not going to change his. And as I said, thank God. You know, I would have been so disappointed otherwise. Okay, so as I said, next time we have Marie-Louise. And not only that, but we're going to find out, after all this time and me alluding to it, the nickname that Dmitri gave her. So you'll want to come back for that, and then we'll be going right into the description of his daily life. He was in Berlin for 6 days, and then he went back to, of course, Paris to face the consequences of the Berlin trip. Okay, it's definitely time to stop. Sorry about that, and I'll see you next time. Bye.